All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It being 6 p.m, I'll open the special meeting of Council. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we meet on, the Wadandi people. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. We pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal communities and their culture, and to elders past and present, their descendants who are with us today and those who will follow in their footsteps. Record of attendance, there's 7 councillors in attendance, with the Deputy President attending via virtual means. I've authorised that attendance under Regulation 14C2B of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996. Councillor Mogg is an apology for this evening. We now move to public question time. I have a few questions on notice. The first from Mr. Brian Hearn. Just the right button. It might not have been on, so it needs to just start up. No, just the right hand button. That's it. Yep.
It's usually the red light to sit down, actually. But yeah. Mr. President, I raise the following questions because decisions made in the draft 25-26 budget indicates that the Shire's future financial viability is now even more heavily reliant on securing future grant funding to enable it to fund its ongoing maintenance and capital expenditure to service its $212 million infrastructure asset portfolio. The time for committing to some hard decisions is even more pressing given the Shire's aspiration to become a Band 2 Shire. So the first question relates to employee costs. Since the 21-22 financial year, employee costs as a percentage of rate revenue, excluding the Dalyellap special area rate, has increased from approximately 68% in 21-22 to 79% in 25-26. In the draft budget. If you factor in the actual annual cost of employing the extra 13.5 staff that's been allowed for in this year's budget, and page 25 of your papers indicate that that cost is about 1.3 million, rather than the staggered cost, which is budgeted at $850,000 appearing in the 25-26 budget. Employee costs as a percentage of rate revenue blows out to about 82%. So that's pretty self-explanatory. So with a further 13 staff planned to be employed in the 26-27 financial year, that's the one after the one we're talking about, at an estimated cost of 1.3 million, and a further 5 staff in 27-28 at an average cost of, at an estimated cost of about 500,000, rate revenue will need to increase by a minimum of about 7% in 26-27 just to fund the proposed 13 new staff. So has this possible scenario been addressed and considered by Council?
Thank you, Mr. Hearn. There's a sort of a range of questions within your subheading on employee costs. The answer I've prepared is based on sort of all those questions at the same time.
I'll listen attentively.
Well, sort of just, yeah, did you want to ask sort of all your questions under employee costs and I can provide a single answer, or?
Oh, well, that was the first one. Is Council aware that the decisions they're making on employing employees over the next 2 years, this year, next year and the year after, have they taken that into consideration when they're looking at their future budgets? I mean, it's a staggering amount of money.
As part of Council's budget considerations, it does look at future financial modelling. We use the WA Treasury modelling tool, which projects out our financial liabilities into future financial years. Based on that modelling, Council does consider its rating scenarios and future budget considerations.
Good, thanks. So will the Shire confirm that this budget, that's the 25-26 draft budget, proposes to only raise an additional $1,069 million in rate revenue, excluding the Dalyellap special area rate, and yet it's seriously planning to spend an extra $2.254 million on salaries in 25-26.
I suppose the additional FTEs for 25-26 have been included as part of the draft annual budget for Council's consideration. The new FTE considerations for 26-27 onwards have not been officially considered by the Council, as its final 25 to 2029 workforce plan has not been presented to the Council for endorsement yet. Budgeted salary increases from 2024-25, so the current financial year, through to the next financial year, is 1.6 million. This is an increase in direct salary wages, annual long service leave provisions being 3% for indoor staff and 4% for outdoor salary, which is based on their enterprise bargaining agreement. So for the forecast 2025-26 salary expenditure is a total figure of $14.9 million. As a salary percentage of rate revenue, this equates to about 76%. Based on the forecast total rate revenue of $19,614,783%. In calculating this against surrounding local governments' percentage ratios based on their current financial budget, because I haven't seen their draft budget allocations, this sits pretty consistently with that around the region. Shire of Dardanup 73%, Augusta Margaret River 73%, City of Bunbury 75%. So Council has taken that into consideration as part of its budget deliberations for this evening.
So I take it the question I asked was, are you aware that you're raising $1,069,000 in revenue and you're spending $2,254,000 extra in salaries? So that was really, Are you aware that, is anyone aware that you're doing that?
Council's been provided all this information through various briefings and as well as the information that's been provided them tonight. There's rise and falls in other allocations and other areas of the budget which can supplement that cost as well, as opposed to a direct rate increase.
Okay. So you're saying there's other costs that fund the 2.2 million and there's other revenue that funds that 2.2 million? Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, there'd be reallocation of funds from other budget areas to make up, so reduction in operational expenditure or capital expenditure.
So it's funding salaries?
Yeah, or it could be a reduction in materials and contracts. So as staff moves from... Yeah, so as part of the workforce plan, there's, off the top of my head, I think it was 4 FTEs who are currently on fixed-term contracts, which are funded through materials and contracts section of the budget. They would transition across to the salaries budget. So as part of when the workforce plan is finally presented to Council, as for its consideration formally, it'll make those sorts of reallocations clear.
So it sounds to me there's a lot of carryover funds funding salaries. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Well, if it's not rates revenue, where's it coming from?
As I said, it could be a reallocation of budget provision. So if a position moves from materials and contracts to a permanent full-time salary, it moves from materials and contracts to salary.
Okay, understand. So given my comments on employee costs, how does this draft budget improve the Shire's financial position and place it in a position to responsibly manage the Shire's $212 million infrastructure asset portfolio, particularly given that the assets are depreciating at a non-funded rate of about $7 million per annum?
So Council recognises the importance of investing in the Shire's asset portfolio, with the 2025-26 draft annual budget funding more than $500,000 in asset data collection and surveying across the asset base to improve the quality of our asset data and internal asset management process. Further to this, some of the new positions identified in the 2025-26 relate directly to the management and maintenance of the Shire's asset portfolio. There's staff provisions that would be relating directly to asset portfolio maintenance. The importance of investing in asset data collection is because there is legacy issues of the Shire not being aware of the assets it owns. Peppermint Grove Beach is a prime example of that, with a number of road drainage, culverts in the area have not been maintained since the inception of the estate. They're full of beach sand. So it's bringing those sorts of assets properly into account and actually budgeting for proper maintenance of those is things that this sort of investment is actually capturing.
Okay, thanks. Next question relates to waste services. The draft budget proposes to increase waste service costs by 5.34% in 25-26, though final figures will not be known until they are added to the 25-26 budget. So the first question, what is the estimated cost of waste services in 25-26?
The Shire's total waste costs for the 25-26 financial year will be determined following the review of the joint FOGO tender process. Once we get that full information, Council will be fully aware of its waste services cost implication. At the moment, though, it's a matter of provisional estimation based on CPI and the forecast increases as part of the waste services contract.
So we don't have an estimated cost for 25-26?
Until that tender is received, we won't have a solid figure.
Will you have an estimated figure?
The Director of Community and Corporate.
Thank you for your question, Mr Hearn. Probably at this time, I would not like to forecast what that looks like. As the Shire President said, it's a joint tender arrangement. In terms of the Shire's partnership in that moving forward will be heavily dependent on the cost and the impact to residents moving forward. And so until such time, I think we would prefer not to put a figure forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So what revenue is expected to be generated from waste services in 25-26, including the 2 and/or 3 bin service, the green and hard waste collections and the annual waste and infrastructure fee?
It's as has been provided in the budget papers and the changes to the fees and charges. I can't remember the figure off the top of my head, but it's essentially last year's revenue plus 5.34%.
Okay, so don't have the figure. Okay. As ratepayers are being asked to comment on the 5.34% increase, the question was, where can I find the necessary information in the draft 25-26 budget? I guess what you're telling me, it's not there, so you don't need to answer that one. What is the estimated increased tonnage of waste expected to be generated in 25-26 compared with 24-25?
I'm not aware of the answer to that question. I'll take that on notice.
Take on notice, because that's obviously pretty dependent on what's going to happen. So, yeah, so it'd be nice to know one of the community meetings what that figure is, if I could follow it up then. The Cleanaway contract was said to be current until 2030. Based on the contract, what CPI numbers were used to calculate the proposed 5.34% increase, and what other contract price rises and fall mechanisms for services provided by Cleanaway have been included in the 5.34% increase?
The annual CPI figure built into the waste services contract is 4.05% per annum, plus any rise and fall components, which is made up of fuel, wages, maintenance and repair costs. So that's what's informed the 5.34%.
So is the 4.05 a bit higher than what the CPI is at the moment, 2.4?
It's what's built into the waste services contract, plus any rise and fall
I had a look at the contract. I couldn't find 4.5, so how did you work out 4.5?
The contract's a confidential document, Mr Hearn. I don't understand.
It's on the webpage.
It shouldn't be.
No, what it is. And also it's mentioned in the report that the consultant did for you. I think was it Tallis? They had all the details in there about the contract, and I didn't see anything approaching 4.5. I worked it out at about 2.3, 2.4 actually. But anyway, so perhaps you could take that on notice and follow that up as well.
Sure.
Thank you. So with the unpublished results of the waste ratepayers survey that appear to be heavily skewed to increasing costs, will that have any bearing on the final 25-26 budget estimate? The
waste ratepayers survey, the information and outcomes of that, the survey did only close at 2 p.m. today. The survey will be made, the information will be made available as part of Council's considerations in July. It wasn't heavily skewed towards increasing cost. It was being realistic of the fact that a solution to potentially take waste out of this area to a different region would have increased cost implications.
Oh, okay, sorry, I missed that.
It was being upfront with the community around this is the service we're currently providing, this is some potential solutions, these are the implications that may go along with that. As was answered in the previous question, there is an estimation around the waste services. However, given that we're unaware of what the actual result of the tender would be, it's only an estimation at this point in time.
Okay, thanks. Dahlia Community, or the DMCYC, the Dahlia Multipurpose Community Youth Centre. In October 24, Council approved a tender of $12.257 million for the above project. It also approved a contingency of 1.603, bringing the total cost to an estimated 13.8 million. The draft 25-26 budget papers indicate the Shire wishes to raise borrowings of 2.218 million to fund the shortfall, presumably between the total external grant, about 10.9, and the funds spent by the Shire, 500,000 in the design and procurement stage. Based on the above, it would appear that the final cost may now be in the order of 13.6 million rather than the original 13.8. So the first question is, what is the estimated cost of the DMCYC project as it now stands?
Following the award of the tender to Perkins and finalising contract negotiations and inclusions, the original project contingency has been reduced from 1.6 million to 1.3, $1,370,343, with no amendments made to the scope of the project of a material nature. This has reduced the overall project cost to 13.6 million.
Good news. Yep. So obviously the scope of the project hasn't changed. So with the reduced cost, has anything been included or deleted?
As I said, there weren't any amendments to the scope of the project of a material nature.
Okay, thanks. So in October 24, Council accepted that in 25-26, the cost of running the DMCYC, that is ongoing asset management, utilities, overheads and admin and staff, etc., would be in the order of 1.525 million, and I think they allowed for a provision in its forward estimates that also assumed that the DMCIC would generate revenue of 766,000 per annum. Given that the project's unlikely to be completed until May of next year, what revenue and expenditure projections have been made for the DMCYC project in the draft 25-26 budget? That's obviously for the running costs of the facility.
At this point in time, the operational provisions have been made largely just consistent with that of maintaining the existing library in Dalyellup, and those costs would just transition to the DMCYC in the interim until Council considers, among a number of things, those implications then as it's in part of its 2026-27 budget.
Okay, so nothing there. Okay, good.
Well, no, there is consideration.
Yeah. Yep, got it. When will the debenture for 2.2 million be drawn? When is the first payment due, and what is the term of the debenture and the applicable interest rate?
The proposed loan equals $2,218,143 with an annual interest rate of 4.5%, with the loan term being 10 years. The loan start date is scheduled for the 30th of June 2026, with the first repayment being the 31st of December 2026. Based on the repayment schedule, the value of the loan repayments for 2026-27 is $277,000.
Okay, thanks. Consultants. One of the major objectives of the council-approved workforce plan...
You had one more... Sorry, Mr. Hearn, you had one more question there around the DMCYC.
I think you just answered it, didn't you?
It was just around the operations.
Sorry, as finance... Well, what I said was, as finance costs have decreased by 23% in the draft 25-26 budget, am I correct in assuming the DMCIs will be made in 25-26? And you just answered that. You said,
right, okay.
Yeah, so you answered that, so thank you. Sorry for confusing you. Consultants, one of the major objectives of the council-approved workforce plan completed by Field Force 4 at a cost of $64,950 was to, in inverted commas, deliver services in-house rather than contract them out. Given the increase in staff numbers since the plan was approved in May 23, what provision has been made in the draft 25-26 budget for expenditure on consultants, And what is the estimated cost? What was the estimated spend in 24-25?
The 2024-25 forecast expenditure on consultants is $446,637, and the 2025-26 draft budget expenditure on consultants is $453,500.
Okay, thank you. It's not unusual for local governments to report expenditure on consultants as a line item in its statement of activity, financial activity, provided in the monthly financial reports. So with a view to honouring the Shire's value, and in particular the value of accountability, will it provide that line item on consultant expenditure in the 25-26 financial year?
Expenditure on consultants is included in the materials and contracts amount and the statement of financial activity in the monthly report. Explanation on material variances year to date for materials and contracts is included in the monthly financial report. If one of these consultant contracts varied more than 10%, it would be reported.
Okay. Pretty hard to pick up. Yeah, I guess so. I've seen a lot of shires, they just have a line item consultancies and they just report it. So, but if you, obviously you don't want to do that. You want to consider doing that?
I had a look and I couldn't find any. Could you send me some examples and I will have a look into that?
Shire of Bunbury, City of Bunbury, they do it.
I didn't look, okay.
Yeah, anyway, but there are others.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I can't pronounce, it's called the Cattiginup Biodiversity Park. How did you pronounce it?
Cardiganup?
Oh, there you are, KPP. The Shire commissioned GHD to complete a feasibility study for the above project, and council subsequently approved and supported Shire Office to lead the ongoing work. So what progress has been achieved to date?
Since the study has been approved by Council, the project detail has been included in the Shire's advocacy prospectus in the hopes of attracting or being eligible for external funding opportunities to fund the staged rollout of the project. For the financial years of 24-25 and 25-26, no funds have been committed to either annual budgets in line with the Council decision.
Okay. And just the Capital Works road program, I just said for what it's worth, there appears to be a discrepancy between what Council approved in May and what's in the draft budget. I mean, it was too hard to compare them, but
Yep.
there just seemed to be I'll let someone else investigate that because...
Yeah, I've got the answer. The variance is in the 25-26 road program and relates to a sealed road project, being Lakes Road in Stratham. This is funded by Roads to Recovery and is a carry forward project to the 26-27 financial year instead of being delivered in the 25-26 financial year due to clearing permit delays. Council will have the final approval of its programs at the July Council meeting when the budget is adopted anyway.
So does that put the budget into deficit or surplus or...?
That'll be fully...
No,
doesn't put it into deficit,
for
but
the purpose of tonight's meeting, does it put the budget into deficit?
No, that's already considered as part of the budget papers that are provided.
Oh, okay. Enterprise Resource Planning, ERP. The draft 25-26 budget is silent on ERP and given that 1.75 million was allocated in 24-25, what progress has been made? I'll just read them all because you can answer it. How long will the project take to implement? What's the estimated cost of the ERP and what funds were allocated, have been allocated in 25-26? What was the spend in 24-25? And last, because it's such an important project, perhaps it could be discussed at the community forums, given that I think the cost is somewhere in the order of 4.5 million. So they're all there. I'm sure you got an answer for all those.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Hearn. The ERP project was awarded to Datacom Solutions AU Proprietary Limited, and the Shire is currently in the contract negotiations phase to ensure that requirements of the Shire and the wider community are assured in the contractual form. Once the contract negotiations are completed and all agreements are finalised, the Shire will host a community workshop about the ERP solution, detailing the implementation timeline and process, the benefits of the new ERP system to the organisation and the community, and the future cost considerations of the project. A date will be scheduled in late July and shared with the community. The current spend in the 24-25 financial year budget is $355,915. The original figure of 1.75 million in the 24-25 budget was due to the expectation that the request for tender procurement process would have been completed earlier, resulting in the initiation with Datacom occurring earlier. The request for tender process was delayed due to multiple vendors requesting extensions, resulting in the request for tender not being awarded until January 2025. The budget allocation for this project in 25-26 is 1.1 million. Financial year 25-26 will be the highest of the years of expenditure towards the ERP project, with several one-off implementation payments following this. The variance of $268,905 being the difference between the amount unspent in 24-25 to the amount that is required to fund the costs in the coming financial year is provisioned to remain in the carryover projects reserved towards funding year 2 of the project implementation.
So to miss that, you said you've spent a couple of $100,000 so far, and you've got to spend another 1.1 before 30 June. Is that what you said?
So far in this financial year, 355,000 has been spent.
Yep.
In the coming financial year, it's budgeted to spend 1.1 million.
Oh.
The difference between those figures is 268,000.
Yep.
That's to be carried over in our carried over projects reserved into 26-27, where it will fund the next stage of the project initiation.
So the difference between the 1.75 million budget and the 200,000 or 300,000 you've spent is being carried over?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks. Charlotte, what do I do? Press something around?
Oh, that's right. Just leave it on.
Leave it on?
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
The next questions I have are from Ms. Hearn. Mrs. Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. President. In our family, we believe in asking questions before the decisions are made. So we thought we might as well ask them tonight. And you can imagine how difficult life was for our children when they came home late with not good stories. So first, I would like to just make a quick commendation. It has been very satisfying to see this meeting advertised on public notice boards around the Shire. And obviously it drew in a quality crowd, and we don't know how many people are at home watching, but it's really satisfying to see the advancements and development the Shire is taking in letting people know what's going on. And so I note the improvements in the Shire calendar and events, and also in the progress in developing the tourism website that's been announced by the President. So I hope things like this encourage people that maybe it's worth coming to meetings and asking questions. Maybe you don't hope that, but that's what I hope. So I have a couple of questions just to check out whether it's worthwhile. The first one is about the electors' comments that are invited by a meeting such as this on the draft budget, the purpose for this meeting. Is the purpose of having the rates ready to advertise basically to meet the statutory requirements, or is it worth ratepayers providing responses? What difference will ratepayers' comments make in what finally goes through?
Thank you for the question, Mrs. Hearn. Excuse me. Just to also answer something you also said, you can see, if you go on the YouTube channel where this is broadcast, it will show you down the bottom there how many people have viewed the clip, if you're interested.
Good. I am missing my red wine, I have to say.
In response to your actual question, there is a requirement in accordance with the Local Government Act 1995, section 6.36, to invite submissions on the intention to levy differential rates. However, the intent of inviting public comment is not just to satisfy these legislative requirements, but also to ensure transparency and provide residents and ratepayers the opportunity to participate in local decision-making. Public submissions offer council insight into community priorities, concerns and expectations, and also these views are carefully considered as part of the final budget adoption process.
That's reassuring. I guess the next part of my question is, will the councillors read and compare the merit and any opportunities suggested in any ratepayers' responses before they mandate the budget prepared by the officers at a subsequent meeting? And will they rely on summaries and assessments of a Shire officer who has the job to read and reply to the comments? And to explain what motivates my question, it's prompted by the experience in last year, and as they say, the past is the best predictor of the future, when ratepayers provided serious, detailed comments amassing to over 60 close-type pages of concerns and overwhelmingly constructive suggestions. And admittedly, the large number of respondents last year may have been prompted by alarm caused when a local newspaper headline suddenly shouted that Capel electors were facing an increase of 17% or more. A disturbing number, a number that no councillor or officer had actually thought to mention during the draft budget meeting last year. In 2024, electors' comments covered a range of different approaches and suggestions that, if they had been judiciously reviewed and even selectively acted upon, as from what we can see how our current 2024 accounts are going, these suggestions could have seen the Shire achieve its actual stated budget outcomes at a bottom line saving of conservatively hundreds of thousands of dollars or more, and simultaneously allowed the council to mandate a much lower rate increase to the ratepayers. But the comments and suggestions seem to be to no avail. Most of last year's submissions merely provoked a cookie-cutter Shire response, repeating a short rationale paragraph from the original draft paper, though some responses did have the addition of "we may consider it later," but later was after the 17% was added. So, as a question, am I right in assuming that ratepayers' comments and responses were not viewed as helpful in budget finalities? And then, to explain that, the clue that led me to the assumption was that there may not have been close reading by councillors. And that is because, I've lost all my spot, but that is because in the 2024 responses by the officers or an officer, in each response it graphically repeated and cited the correct rate in the dollar for residential rates, which was 8.25 cents, over and over again. And only one councillor recognised that this repeated rate that was in those responses was not used in any of the incorrect tables proposed in the budget motions in exactly that same document. It could have been that with more attention to those repeated responses, the council could have avoided some damage to its reputation and public confidence and avoided the legal costs and trouble that followed with the rate of dollar issue, which I was disappointed to hear dismissed here by a councillor last month as just a decimal point. So that's my question.
Thank you for the question, Ms. Hearn. To address a few things that were raised there, I can't speak on behalf of the individual councillors as to their individual approach to reviewing community feedback. However, it is my observation that all councillors do read and consider submissions made by the public, not only through the formal feedback mechanisms, such as what will be part of tonight's recommendation, but also by attending community functions, other events, and also just commenting with people on the phone or on the street. Council has taken accountability for the error it made in its rating table this financial year, and while not every submission received results in a change to the budget, they do collectively inform Council's understanding of the community sentiment. This can influence rating, the final budget funding allocations, servicing levels, project prioritisation, particularly where community feedback is of interest or feedback highlights emerging needs or overlooked impacts. So in short, yes, it is absolutely worth responding. Council values and the input of our community and remains committed to making informed, balanced decisions that reflect both the legislative requirements and the shared vision of all our residents. It's worth noting, because it was touched on by yourself a little bit, you know, the update to the events calendar and the sharing of the this meeting on the notice boards in the community. They came from suggestions from yourself at our annual electors meeting earlier this year. So we are listening and we are making changes. So I'd like to,
that's why
thank you for making those
Mr.
suggestions. And
President, I hope you'll keep listening.
so setting the annual budget involves making difficult and complex decisions following months of briefings and workshops between elected members and the administration. However, these decisions are guided by the responsibility to act in the best interests of the entire community to ensure sustainable delivery of services, infrastructure, and our long-term financial sustainability.
Thank you. And it's probably not a good year to be asking you about responses to comments from ratepayers, because I doubt you'll get so many this year. Because two things: one, you have actually said out loud what the rate increases are going to be in this paper, and also as we there's a pretty big cushion from 17% increase last year, and as we've all learnt by going through lots of elections lately, budgets in election years tend to be less disruptive. So my second question is about progress. Any planned works, actions and budget provisions for the Capel Coastal Hazard Risk Management Adaptation Plan, known as the CHIRMAP. After 4 years' involvement in regional study and development, 18 months ago, in January 2024, the Council adopted in principle the Capel Coastal Hazard Risk Management and Adaptation Plan. Responsibility for the action and the Council oversight was placed under the purview of the Council Climate Change Adaptation and Sustainability Committee. Additionally, provision was made that yet a lower level, under the Sustainability Committee, a community-based Capel Coastal Subcommittee would be established. Work on the CHIRMAP is included in lots of council documents: the Corporate Business Plan, the Strategic Community Plan, and specifically and very positively as one of our Shire leaders' key performance indicators, which says that development of the CHIRMAP Action Plan, Phase 1, will be completed by the 30th of June 2025, including community consultation processes. I'm looking forward to what happens in 20 days hence. So the imminence of that plan suggested to me that this budget would need to have some provisions for this plan. And I've been unable to find any mention of CHIRMAP provisions in this draft budget or in my, looking over the long-term financial plan or in the works plan. And there appears to be no information of specific reserves provided in the budget paper. So, can you please tell me what financial provision has been made in this budget and the long-term financial plan for the CHIRMAP for the coming financial year, and where, if I was cleverer, would I have found this provision?
Thank you, Mrs. Hearn. The Shire has allocated $70,000 in its current budget and $50,000 in the draft 2025-26 budget for the development of 2 foreshore management plans, being for Peppermint Grove Beach and Dalyella. It is envisioned that the majority of this budget will be put towards a qualified consultant to undertake the foreshore management plan for the Shire. It is, however, recognised that such funding will unlikely be sufficient for a comprehensive foreshore management plan. As such, the Shire has applied for external grant funding via Coastal WA for their Coastal Management Plan Assistance Program. The outcome of this is to be determined next month. Quotations for the preparation of a foreshore management plan have been received and are currently being evaluated by Shire staff. The foreshore management plans, once adopted, will establish future works required to mitigate the findings from these plans. This will then be considered as part of any long-term financial plan and future annual budgets. Further detail around this specific fundings that I have mentioned will be included in the final budget papers that will be presented to Council in July.
So did I miss is it there now? Or?
It's included within a cost activity area.
So it will be specific?
Yeah. There'll be more detail as part of the July budget consideration.
But because I could find the 70,000 for this year, but I was looking forward to a little bit more, and I'm also delighted to know that application for grants is underway, because frequently note has been made that for the Shire to carry out our responsibilities, we're going to require significant financial input over time. And presumably that means external grants. And when you look around to other local seaside councils, either side of us, they're moving ahead already with works supported by substantial grants for which they qualified as they were able to make their own contributions from preserved reserve funds that they had been building for several years. So you're saying that we have some money, but my question is, what reserves are we laying down so we will be in that strong position?
At this point in time, there isn't a budget provision towards allocating funds to a reserve. The Shire does have a reserve where it has put some funds in the past, but as I mentioned in the question is, once we have those foreshore management plans, which will show sorry, I'm tripping up my own tongue here. Once we have those foreshore management plans, it will then show us our long-term financial implications and requirements for future annual budgets, and that's when we'll start programming that into our long-term financial plan and make consideration towards funding allocations towards building reserves.
You realise I'm getting older, don't you?
I am too.
Okay, and I am pleased to hear about the plans for the foreshore management plan, because that was one of the earlier actions that was proposed as necessary. And then the other one was community education and communication, and that was seen to be crucial to the implementation of a chair map. And the community-based committee was, if you look at their rules of operation, seem to have a pretty strong job of going out and working in that way. So how many times has the Capel Coastal Subcommittee met? And there again, where could I find agendas and minutes if I was good at hunting?
As previously stated, the establishment of the Capel Coastal Subcommittee is to assist in considering matters relating to the implementation of the Char Map recommendations. This subcommittee will meet on a quarterly basis or as required, with additional meetings convened as requested by the chairperson. This subcommittee meeting had its first meeting on the 30th of April 2025. The minutes of the subcommittee, once confirmed, will be available on the Shire's website.
I'm delighted to hear that. Thank you very much. And just remember, I am getting older.
There was a couple of other questions that you had. Did you have those to ask, or we'll just include them as part of the minutes?
I don't know. What were they? What were they?
They did have quite lengthy answers, particularly the one around the question you asked on what work studies or advancement is planned in the 25-26
I'm
budget.
very happy to hear lengthy answers or to have them put in. I thought when you said that you were doing the foreshore plans, that was it. But there's lengthier ones.
There's a few other things, more internal things. That there is quite a bit. Like I've got at least 2 pages in front of me. We'll include the full detail in the minutes, but I can just go over the headings. So the Capel sub.
I have read the minutes of the Sustainability Committee from November, where there was the last report of people meeting.
Sure.
Or you read them, please.
So the Capel Coast Subcommittee had its first meeting, which was on the 30th of April. There's an internal Char Map steering group meetings which have been established with Shire staff. This includes the Manager of Development Services, Manager of Parks, Facilities and Assets, Manager of Parks, Waste and Natural Environment, Manager of Engineering Works, the Planning Coordinator, Sustainability Officer and the Natural Resource Officer. This regularly meets and has a rolling agenda to ensure that items are made sure they're actionable and there is a level of accountability provided to departments based on which tasks are assigned towards them. There's been meetings between the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage and Shire officers. The Shire has had its GIS mapping system upgraded to include the mapping files from WaterTech and the Paranaturalist Partnership. This has been uploaded to include the inundation and erosion lines into the Intramap system, which includes layers for the erosion lines of 2020, 2035, 2050 and 2120, as well as the inundation lines for a 1 in 1 year, 1 in 10 year, 1 in 100 year and 1 in 500 year storm event. This will aid the Shire to inform decision making with respect to potential relocation of Shire-owned assets, as well as boundaries for future potential special control areas. The asset management strategy, on its meeting on the 30th of October, Council endorsed the revised asset management strategy. which will focus on improved measurement and monitoring of our asset performance, particularly in consideration of the char map and the inundation and vulnerable community information. Shire officers have recognised that several local governments within Western Australia are well advanced in their decisions and actions relating to char maps. As such, the Shire staff have been meeting with the City of Albany as one of the local governments that has undertaken scheme amendments and introduced special controlling areas within their planning framework. Shire officers also working within the region have begun investigating a geograph char map steering group to ensure that local governments, particularly the City of Bunbury, City of Busselton and the Shire of Capel, as the owners of the largest stretch of coastline, taking a coordinated approach towards the joint responsibility that comes towards coastal management. That's a brief overview of everything, but it'll all be included in the minutes.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to reading the minutes of those committees as well.
Thank you,
Thank
Mrs.
you.
Hearn. All right, they are all the questions I had on notice. Are there any questions from the floor? No questions? No? Move to declarations of interest. Are there any interest to declare? Doesn't seem to be. There's no notice of items to be discussed behind closed doors. There's no announcements by the presiding member. There are no received petitions, deputations or presentations. Move to section 8, reports. 8.1, the 2025-26 draft annual budget, annual rating strategy, differential rates. There's a recommendation there. Is there a mover? Move to Councillor McCleary. Seconder. Councillor Dillon. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Councillor Dillon. At least now we get to talk about the thing. I'll move the motion as read, and I'll note that there's a few things in the motion. There's particularly the item 4, which might address Mrs. Hearn's comments that the notice of intentional levy differential rates at item 8.112 be received and endorsed. Public submissions received regarding the differential rate shall be considered by the council before adoption of any proposed rates. I think there's a bit more work when that comes in, and we'll see what comments come through all the workshops. So there is in the recommendation to review those submissions as they come in. I note there's a bit of concern about certain things in there. There's also in the budget papers, there's an indication that there's a $4.5 million carryover in assets, which is mainly due to the Dalyellup Community Centre. There's also a big increase in the employee cost and a bit of adjustment to consultancies. One of the things that we've been pushing through the year is in the capital works program, so we don't get caught up with this carryover, is to actually do some forward works, and there are smaller portions of works identified in the budget that are in a design phase, so we get the scoping right before we jump in and chuck the big dollars at it. So with that said, I'll pass it on to others.
Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President, and very well spoken, Councillor McCleary. Wholeheartedly agree. Look, just to reiterate what he said, I mean, this is our draft annual budget, so we would encourage public submissions. And thank you to Mrs. Hearn for her comments along those lines. Look, I'm pretty sure everyone in this room reads all those comments. Bearing in mind there's an element of stewardship that I think all councillors up here feel the need that we need to do the right thing by the Shire. It might be the case that a few people are jumping up and down about particular things, but I think everyone in this room is here to see Capel progress and progress in a good way. And I know there's a lot of consideration goes into all decisions made around this table, in particular when it comes to our budget. I think it's a very good budget all in all. Of course, you know, last year was a pretty rocky road with the revaluation and what have you, but this is quite a modest budget, and I do take on board what Mrs Hearn said about, being an election year. I don't think ultimately it's got anything to do with that. As Councillor McCleary correctly said, we've had quite a few carryovers, which a few at this table have been concerned about, and we wanted something that was sort of more modest and deliverable, perhaps. I'm keen to see largely keen to see the workforce plan go ahead, despite, some consternation from maybe pockets of the community. We have identified there's some gaps in staffing, and with it, services that our residents and ratepayers deserve. There will be a heavy focus, which the councillors have been talking about, on assessing our asset base. Really, over the journey, Capel's growing at a great rate. We know we've got a lot of assets we need to maintain, but we need some data on those assets before we can really plan as we need to. So I'm keen to see that happen. Just back to one of my bugbears, carryover projects, there's a fair few rolling through, hence a lot of new work is more about design and scope, which I'm happy to see, because that way we'll get better outcomes and deliverable outcomes, which is something I think we all want to see.
Are there any speakers? Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr Shire President. I will like to move to support the motion, but with an amendment. And my amendment would be that we introduce, in addition to table 1, a table 2 to go out on public discussion, where the categories, or in zones 1 to 4, are calculated on the rate and the dollar at a rate of 5% increase, as opposed to the published existing table of 3%. I'm suggesting we publish both tables and we present that to the public at our public briefings and into the forums that we introduce, and have the public offer some determination as to why they would like to support that. Now, I'd like to speak to the motion, but I'll need a seconder.
I think you make a determination in relation to a rate now. Consider that as a...
Just apologies, council. I'll just get some advice, because I'm not sure if council can actually advertise 2 rates at the same time. Just give me a moment. All right, I'll adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes to allow staff to gain advice. All right, it being 6:59, I'll call the meeting back to order. Councillor Tarantroy, Councillor Noonan, please resume your seats. Thank you, everyone. After consideration under the Standing Orders Local Law Clause 9.92, I will refuse that amendment, given that it has the potential effect of negating the primary motion, and under section 636(3)(bi) of the Local Government Act 1995, the notice adopted by council is to contain details of each rate or minimum payment the local government intends to impose. By the addition of an additional table, it would be contrary to the intent or spirit of the Act.
Well, thank you, Mr Shire President. Then, with your indulgence, I'll amend my suggested amendment that the published rate table of the GRV values be adjusted to reflect a 5% increase, that is, for zones 1 to 4 and for zone 12.
We'll get that on the board. All right, is that your amendment on the board there, councillor?
Yes, thank you, Mr Shire President. Thank you, Mr Shire President, yes.
All right, is there a seconder to that motion? Seconded, Councillor Tarantroy. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr Shire President. Look, I've looked at this budget, as all other councils have, with some great interest, obviously, and I was intrigued to acknowledge or reflect on the fact that when we had the discussions about 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was a broad range of views as to what the increase might be or should be. We then were presented with a document a week ago that basically said 3% was settled. And in my view, we'd never actually arrived at that point. And as a consequence, when we deal through the paper, I actually would suggest this budget, whilst it's tidy, completely lacks ambition. There is absolutely not $1 of ambition in this budget. It's built around the prospect that we'll increase the rates by the minimum, seemingly to me, and then we'll just meet the ongoing costs that arise, including those very substantial increase in labour costs, which as a council we've broadly endorsed. But if the concerns that I have primarily are some that have been foreshadowed by some of the questionnaires, not because we've collaborated on this, but nonetheless I think you can arrive at the same conclusions. In respect to the contaminated site reserves, now this has been an issue that has been discussed, admittedly in an ad hoc way, in council as to the potential problem into the future to deal with this. Now, we show a reduction, budget transfers out of $100,000 and our closing budget balance in that reserve of $322,000. And I don't see in the documents that have been presented for this budget justification any increase in provisions in that particular reserve. I might also go to, and one of the questionnaires has obviously highlighted this much more eloquently than I could, the Climate Change Adaptation and Sustainability Reserve. We're suggesting an increase of $2,000 by interest only. Now, we've talked about the fact that we put aside $60,000, and in a question to one of the questions this evening from the Shire President, the answer was the $60,000 had been allocated but not spent, and $50,000 was allocated in this financial year, but probably won't be drawn down because we haven't had the capacity to go to the state government and actually say to the appropriate agency in state government that we can in fact offer up matching funds. We've got no money. $80,000 wouldn't even build a sandbank barrier in front of one of the beaches. We have not committed ourselves seriously. We've adopted the CHAR map and put it on the shelf, sitting on the shelf. We're not doing anything about it because we say, oh, we haven't got the funds. We haven't got the funds because we haven't got the courage as a council to go to the community and ask for them and receive them. We've got to do this. We've got to create a strategic opportunity for this council, not just a holding pattern. We should be, as good custodians, as referred to by one of my fellow councillors, as good custodians, we should be building up these reserves. And then we come to the waste reserve. Now, they used to say, if you could understand, in the early days, and I'm old enough to remember, but when you could understand your mobile phone plan, well, you're a Mensa. You were brilliant. No one else could. I can't understand what's going on with the waste fee. I tried to ask the question, and I will ask the question in the context of my address to council. The question is, in the financial year 24-25, what was the cost of the waste contract? How much of that was recovered by fees and how much of it was supported from reserves? Through you, Mr. President.
Oh, sorry, Ross, that was the question. As was mentioned in an email, the current waste services contract and the fees that are being collected cover about 98% of the cost. However, that figure may change given that because of the FOGO, food and organics waste, being diverted to landfill, there is actually a reduced cost to the council, or rather than the FOGO charge. It's cheaper for the waste to go to landfill. So it's likely that council would have probably charged more than was actually required on a cost recovery basis for that cost area. If there's any additional comments from the Director.
Thank you for your question, Shire President. Through the Chair, looking at the 24-25 financials and the reserve transfers that we forecast out of the waste reserve, we anticipated buffering the waste impact to residents by about $800,000 in the current financial year. Probably what the reserve analysis has shown us that we're having to support it by around $600,000 this financial year. So in some degree, we've made a saving in terms of what we originally forecast by about $200,000.
Again, through you, Mr. Shire President. That didn't really answer my question. How much revenue do we anticipate to derive from the waste fees in 24-25, and how much do we anticipate spending on the contract, and how much would we need to pull from reserves? I'm not, bearing in mind, again, apologies, Mr. Shire President, I'm not asking about the 25-26. I'm just trying to get my head around, and council's head around, where we are at the moment.
I don't have that number in front of me, Councillor, and I don't believe the Director would either. We can take that question on notice, but if I can find it and provide that answer to you within this meeting, I will.
Well, again, through you, Mr. President, Shire President, a question. Is it reasonable to infer that we are still subsidising the waste contract from a capital reserve?
In some figures that I provided to Council earlier this week, it appeared that the fees charged directly to residents for for waste services covered 98% of the waste services contract. The remaining 2% would have either come from a reserve account or out of general revenue.
Again, through you, Mr. Shire President, a question. So where does the figure of a saving of $200,000 on reserve drawdowns come from? I know I acknowledge being a bit deficient here, but I'm perplexed.
I'll allow the Director to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's because, as I mentioned earlier, with the food and organics waste being diverted to landfill, it's actually resulted in a cost saving. It's cheaper for FOGO to go to landfill than it is for it to actually be processed and turned into compost. So because Bunbury-Harvey Regional Council has put a limit of a 1% contamination rate on all food and organics waste, that pretty much means every single food and organics garbage collection truck in the southwest is non-compliant, that waste is now going to landfill. And it is cheaper on a per tonne rate for that waste to go to landfill than for it to have been processed into compost. That's where the savings come from.
Oh, look, thank you, Mr. Shire President. I'll move on, but I still acknowledge being somewhat perplexed and would like to have a better understanding of that into the future, particularly for the future year in 25-26. But then I move on to this issue regarding the rates. In terms of talking about my own perspective, knowledge where I have a greater, more detail than some of the other councillors do in the areas in which they reside in and to some extent might say represent, one of the items I moved to be adopted by council when budget submissions from councillors was sought was a fund, and I had no idea how much it might cost. I was advised that my figure was substantially lower than the likely cost, but actually to undertake a strategic reserve analysis, a strategic master plan of the reserve around the Peppermint Grove Beach Community Centre. The reason for that is that we can't apply for funds from various government agencies, even the Lotteries Commission, without a master plan. Now, if that's been, I don't see any evidence of that in the budget. I could stand to be corrected, and I'll be pleased to be corrected. But as one of the people presenting here tonight said, I'm not getting any younger. I mean, I've got a term on council, it doesn't expire in this October, but nonetheless, I can't see anything being done about this unless we can start planning for the future. Now, Peppermint Grove Beach at the moment has an interesting demographic. You can categorise it whichever way you like, but one of the things that is emerging is there is a younger group moving in, more family orientated with children and what have you. We need to have those sorts of facilities in Peppermint Grove Beach to attract and evolve the demographic into one that actually is more widely spread and not concentrated on a particular group. And one of the reasons for doing that would be to actually have decent amenities and facilities in the immediate vicinity, not have to drive to Capel or dangerously ride your bike on the road to Capel, because we've got the trailways. They might come in my lifetime, they might not. I get dismayed when that's not supported. I also am concerned that when we talk about the introduction of the Capel, and I've got to be careful with my words here, the Capel Regional Agricultural Precinct, and I won't use the acronym. Now, we're going to receive a report, this costs us a couple $100,000 in July, regarding directions of a way into the future. I can see no capacity or provision into a reserve for the opportunity, hopefully, to pursue that particular project into the future. Now, we don't know what the recommendation might be, but we would know as night follows day that it won't be a no-cost one to council. It's going to cost us something to take it to the next level, assuming there is a next level. Now, we're happily, collectively as a council, to support the attendance of our Shire President and Deputy Shire President to the Australian National Local Government Association meeting in Canberra, where they might have the opportunity to present our case to interested parties at the political level, and I hope they do. But nonetheless, we've got to have a bit of money in the bank to take it a bit further forward. I can't see any evidence of any capacity for us other than to draw down on other funding sources when this report comes to council.
Apologies,
we
Councillor.
need to have a provision.
You're approaching your time limit. Do you want more time?
If it's the will of council to extend my time, yes.
I'll move that a time extension of 5 minutes be granted to Councillor Ferguson. All those in favour? All those in favour? Councillor Sciano, I can see physically on the screen that you're voting affirmative. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
All right, that's carried unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Shire President, for the reminder. Then the other thing is that the other provisions we've made, for example, we were all, a number of councillors were, I think, delighted to be at the Ironstone Falls opening of the trailway identification markers, those beautifully rendered, colourful markers on the trail, rendered and done in consultation with the local Indigenous community. And there is $20,000 in the budget to actually develop a master plan or a plan, a facilities plan for that amenity. But there's no money to execute it. There's no provision. We've not made any accountable provision to provide some funds sitting in reserve that hopefully the council, on receipt of the master plan report, would be minded to implement. Now, you can't keep relying upon the mid-year budget review. There may or may not be any money left. If we want to implement that, preserve that reserve for both all members of the community, undertake the remediation work that's going to be necessary, deal with the noxious weeds and all the other issues that are evident there, then we need to have some capacity to fund it in the foreseeable future. Not in the distant future, in the foreseeable future. I would suggest that we're underdoing a number of those types of projects. The other one is the implementation of electric vehicles. Now, Councillor Tarantroy has made a very interesting observation. I don't see in our vehicle plan any indication that we're minded to actually think seriously about that issue. Now, that may or may not be a budget issue, but if it is, if we've got to actually apply for and match funding for electric charging stations at our council locations, that's here in Capel, here in Daliella, and so forth, then we need to be thinking about that and we need to be funding that up. We need to have some capacity to do it and not say we can't do it because we haven't got any money. Now, I'm sure councillors around the table have got any number of projects that they submitted in February, March, and that they're aware of in their communities that are very much in need of funding, and we have not provided any capacity to do so. My amendment would provide, if I recall the advice from the appropriate officer, is that each 1% raises about $180,000. If we go for my suggested increase to 5% as opposed to 3%, there's an extra 360 or thereabouts, maybe a bit more. That would go a long way to dealing with some of these reserve issues, putting them into these strategic reserves, and dealing with some of the short-term funding issues that communities are very keen for us to present. Now, you'll get some pushback, but I make the comment, I've never yet met a ratepayer or a resident that wanted less done. They want more done for less, but that's a different question. That's a different question. We've got some really intriguing matters to consider in terms of the workforce plan. There's been a late recommendation. The plan that was presented to us 3 weeks ago was a bit different to what we were considering 6 or 9, 12 months ago in terms of its structure. I have no problem with that, but it is a different structure. We've now had a proposal coming through from your good self, Shire President, which I don't have any particular issue with, but we need to actually have a conversation about it as a council.
Apologies, Councillor, just 1 minute warning.
Pardon?
1 minute on warning.
Thank you, Mr. Shire President. So I'd like to close on saying that I would ask council to support the 5% increase and then leave it up to the community to inform us whether they want it. But when offering that 5% increase, explain to the residents and the ratepayers that the reason for this is we want to do these things. Thank you.
Councillor Tarantroy.
I'd like to thank Councillor John Ferguson for putting this amendment in. I am concerned about being financially fiscal. I'm concerned about the lack of money in our reserves. I'm concerned about all of these plans that we have, but we don't have any spare cash to match like a 50-50 grant? Like when we apply for grants and things like that, we as a council have to use some money that comes from residents to put towards these things. There's very few grants that fund anything 100%. So I am concerned about this, and I have been concerned since elected in 2021. So I think it's a braver thing to do to put a 5% increase on the rates. We're talking about residential urban development, mixed use residential, vacant land, commercial service, commercial district centres, light industry, MUR commercial, use and vacant GRV, and also rural residential, because those three in the column on page 30 of the agenda on Docs on Tap, which is different from the agenda that's published on the internet, for you guys to look at. Actually, I think that's page, actually, I don't know what page it is, I didn't note it, but I think that it just makes more sense. We do need more funds, and I think that I take my stewardship of this Shire really seriously. I'm a community-minded person, always have been, and I've always been concerned about where's all this money coming from. And sure, we need a new ERP. We need to have more staff to be able to deliver the services that the residents require, and also for the DMCYC, when it's finally built, we need more staff to do that. And we've also got other staffing issues coming up in the workforce plan. But we need to be able to fund all this, and I have grave concerns. I'm a school teacher. I'm not an accountant, but I have always been concerned about this issue of the lack of funds. So I will be voting for this amendment. Thank you.
All right. Are there any speakers against the amendment? Speakers for?
Speaker against.
The Deputy President?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, look, I think there's a few things to consider here, both statutory requirements of how we go around the process of setting rates, and also I think some consideration around the history of what has occurred with our budget and rating strategy in recent years. So I think firstly, and I think I'm following this correct, but obviously with the amendment, we're currently focused on just amending the proposed rating strategy from a 3% increase in GRV's rating categories to 5%. And now council will know that I've been a very strong advocate for keeping this year's rate increase as low as possible, that being 3%. And the reason why I thought 3% was most suitable is that with all things considered, the rating strategy that's before council today has a yield growth of 5%. That's 5% yield, and knowing that this is an area above CPI that obviously does allow the Shire to have that room to grow. And fiscal responsibility is not always about it is about stewardship in the way of while CPI might be 2.93%, taking CPI every year is not going to allow you to grow or provide additional service or level of customer service. And that's why we always need to be considering what the yield of a rating strategy is. And just simply throwing up the rate by another 2% on GRVs may not necessarily increase your yield by 2%. And actually, in fact, I think that based on the modelling that the Director of Corporate Financial and Corporate Community and Corporate had given us previously, that's not those two things don't work in parallel. So this is not a 2% additional yield to the Shire's budget if we were to adopt it for these four categories, or five categories, 1 to 4 and 12 as well. Now, my next concern with this is around the conversation that council had about the rating strategy last year. Council obviously chose to reduce its GRV significantly off the back of a one of the largest GRV revaluations the Shire has seen in recent decades. And this was seen as, while obviously it did still result in an 18% increase to the back pocket of many, or more for many, including myself, as Judy Hearn mentioned in question time. The conversation we had at that point was about being bold and knowing that there were things coming up that we really needed to do, and taking leadership, and the ERC was one of those things. Now, you look at the forecast for 24-25 and you see a $2.1 million surplus. And what you actually have in front of you is an organisation that is probably not at this stage capable of actually spending this amount of money. And I think that the surplus to me, and this is something to speak about in the general discussion around the budget and rates as well, is, I can't see the justification for why the council could spend any more, given the huge increase to our budget, the growth in our budget volume in the last financial year, and our inability through various different reasons and various different departments able to actually get that money out the door. And more concerningly is the risk that the federal assistance grant schemes haven't been reconciled. And if that payment arrives before the end of this financial year, that figure may in fact be double what is presented in the budget at the moment, and how that is budgeted for accordingly in the next financial year is a concern for me. But I can't see any justification for anything more than 3%. Now, while I think Councillor Ferguson has outlined several really positive initiatives and great ideas, the time and discussion for those things is through our corporate business plan. It's not about raising rates to fund ideas. It's about putting together the ideas and the vision for the Shire and understanding what we need to achieve that. And that's how we set rates. That's why we work through the year, looking at our work program, having an idea of where we need to go, maintaining a budget, working on the workforce plan, and then coming back and actually realising, well, what is the real cost of that, and what can we afford to achieve in this short term? So, Council, I think it would be a bad decision to go above 3% on the GRV, noting, of course, that there are different rates being applied to the UV for various reasons, and they obviously have a revaluation every year, so they have had a significantly higher revaluation this year. There's obviously no reval on the GRV, but I just cannot support going any more than 3%. And when I say 3% on the GRV, I mean a 5% yield. I mean the Shire of Capel, through the current rating strategy, or the strategy that's been proposed by the staff, will increase its budget volume by 5%. Immediately after a year where it was unable to get the money out the door in 24-25. So I can't see the justification for why the Shire needs more until perhaps the conversation here is that we need to work on the corporate business plan and how do we streamline those ideas around the table that have been discussed tonight into budgeted items. And, even some of the things that have been raised tonight, the electric vehicle charging, we already applied for that grant. The grant came to council and this room decided that we weren't going to proceed with it. So we had that conversation in our fleet strategy. We've had that conversation when we endorsed those programs of works, particularly even the fleet replacement. So look, I cannot see, be it some really great ideas around the table, I cannot see the justification for going for 5% on the GRV. Thanks.
All right, are there any further speakers? Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I fully concur with my fellow councillor Shiano in that 3% it gives us a 5% return. I'm also mindful that he's right. We work through a corporate business plan to get priorities for things. And now what I'm hearing is, hang on, I want this done, so that's going to jump the priority. And that concerns me. That's where we get a bit all out of place with where we're heading in at budget constraints. As for EVs, I'm a great believer in the private industry should be taking some of this on board. We're seeing a lot of service stations come in around the place and other facilities that they have opportunity to nail in some of these grants and do it themselves, and you see it in some of the parts in Bunbury. So let's advocate for that rather than spending ratepayers' money on stuff. It'd be a bit like subsidising everyone's fuel bill for a while if we start doing those sorts of things. It's just one of those odd things. Why don't you service stations put EV chargers in there? I mean, you see a few on the open road that do it, but there's also the capacity for the grid to supply the energy to it. So that's going off track. Look, totally agree. 3%'s it. Let's put this out to the community, get their feedback on it. Jumping to 5% without a lot of background to it, it's a bit mischievous.
Probably just give a group warning around, we'll just be a little bit more courteous towards our other elected members. Are there any further speakers for or against? Question, Councillor Tarantroy.
So, could I ask a question of Director and Corporate, through you, President Kitchen? So if we increase the rates to 5% for those areas, for the GRV, where would that money go to, and why wouldn't it not increase the yield?
The Director of Community and Corporate Services.
Thank you. There is a chance that it may increase the yield. It's just where when you run the modelling and you increase the GRV by 5%, what impact that has on the minimum rate. So if you start getting more properties that start accessing the minimum rate, it has an opportunity to drop your revenue because they're not accessing the GRV. So you'd have to run the model basically just to see what the impact is. I mean, overall, you know, your rate revenue would increase, but I couldn't give you a figure at this moment in time what that would look like.
And another question, if I may. How much money do we have untied in reserves?
Director, I think last time we had this conversation it was between 2 and 2.5 million.
And untied, yeah. Could I take that on notice and come back to you? Thank you.
All right.
Oh, sorry, just a follow-up question on that, sorry. So would it be how much we'd have in untied at the end of 25-26 based on what we'd modelled to come out, or untied at the end of 24-25?
I just remember asking for it to be modelled and we didn't get it modelled. So at 5%.
Right.
During one of our workshops so that we could actually look at it and consider it.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
All right, are there any further speakers for or against? Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'd like to thank Councillor Ferguson for putting up this motion or this amendment, and all of the other councillors who've spoken so far for their input. My observation is that or a couple of observations I'd like to make is that the 5% yield from a 3% rate rise, that's primarily due to the fact that there's an additional 140 houses every year that come on board that add to the number of houses that are being rated. So if we consider that means another 140 residents, arguably couples, and let's say if only half of them had just one child, you're looking at an extra football team, or you're looking at 3 or 4 extra netball teams. You're looking at potentially up to 50 additional little kids rolling up down at the Surf Lifesaving Club saying, you know, they want to join the Nippers. We are a growing shire, And we're one of the fastest growing local government areas, not just in the south, in Western Australia, but in the whole of Australia. We know that. And so it's our responsibility as good stewards, as good custodians, to plan for that and to make provision for that future growth. Now, the transfers in and out of reserves have been mentioned, and there are some big movements, and I acknowledge, there's a difference of about $5 million coming out of reserves over the next year. So, I acknowledge that a large part of that is for the Dalyellup Multipurpose Community Centre. And by the way, the next time you're driving up Bustle Highway or going past Dalyellup, it's nice to see now that some of the steel structure is actually standing for that. So it's good to see the real physical benefit that the community is going to enjoy this time next year as a result of the forward planning that previous councils were brave enough to have, to get, and I acknowledge the very substantial contributions of the state and federal governments to that project, but it took a lot of hard work from the officers here, and it took a commitment of funds from the Shire to get that project started. And that is the sort of thing that we need to provide for. Now, Councillor Ferguson has already mentioned the remediation work that we have to do. Now, we know that off Harewoods Road, on Nottingham approach, Robin Hood Way, that reserve opposite or adjoining those roads, that reserve was the old rubbish tip, the North Capel rubbish tip. It was remediated to a degree, and then promoted as a dog exercise area. However, subsequent investigations, revealed that the place is still contaminated with asbestos. The remediation bill for that site is going to be substantial. We've had the report. The council's had the report. We know that, and that's just one of many sites in the Shire where we have to, at some stage, clean it up. In addition to that, the works, the depot here in Capel, we know that the ground is contaminated. We know that that's something that we have to do. If we don't provide for that in future budgets, and I know that we have covered some of it in the long-term capital plan, but we haven't covered all of it. Okay? In addition to that, Mrs. Hearn rightly points out that climate change is a real thing that we need to be. We actually need to be planning for the remediation work that is going to be required in the event of a more severe storm event, which all serious climate scientists have confirmed, and our experience over just the last 10 years, we've seen more severe storm events taking more damage or causing more damage along the coast. So there's no point
Apologies,
spending
Councillor. 30 seconds. Do you need more time?
I should be able to wrap it up in 30 seconds. Give me a minute, perhaps.
I'll be against standing orders. I'll just move that we allow Councillor in another 5 minutes, as per standing orders. All those in favour? Those against?
Thank you.
That's carried. Sorry, that's carried 6-2. Councillor Sciano, just confirming your vote was affirmative.
Yes, it was 4.
Yeah.
Thanks for your indulgence. Yeah, I'll just wrap up by saying that we have to build the reserves. It's our responsibility to future generations. If we don't, the effect is that the other very important piece of infrastructure I was going to talk to was the sports spaces plan, in particular for Dalyella. We know that we are going to need at least an additional 2 football ovals, hockey ovals. We're going to need netball courts. We know that these things are coming up, and at the moment we haven't got the ability to provide for them when it becomes, critical. And we know that there's already severe pressure on the existing ovals and sports facilities in Dalyella. So we know all of this is coming. We have to be able to provide for it, because if we don't, by putting some money aside in reserves specifically for those sorts of that sort of infrastructure, the impact is that future councils are going to have to say, well, we've got to provide this, so we're going to have to take out a thumping big loan. And so we would be saddling our children and future generations, not just with the loan repayments, but also interest repayments, which will require even larger increases in rates for future generations. So this is all part of just being responsible. I echo the words of Councillor Terrantroy that it's about being good stewards, providing for the future. So I will be voting for the amendment. Thank you.
Are there any further speakers for or against the amendment? Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Short and sweet as I like to be. Look, I understand everything Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Terrantroy and Councillor Noonan have pointed out. However, I don't believe that this is the moment to change things. I think we need to put forward, as presented, this item for the public to give us their feedback on, and we need to address any concerns along the lines mentioned here this evening at the time we look at the corporate business plan.
Are there any further speakers? Question, Councillor McCleary.
Just given the time, if this motion gets up, how do the staff get that around to create the rating categories and the strategies, and what sort of timeline do we need, and will that affect the timing of the future meetings? Do we have to delay them?
The Director of Community and Corporate Services.
Thank you for your question, Councillor, through the Chair. The amendments can be made tomorrow to the rate table, and obviously the realisation of what that brings in additional revenue, and circle that with councillors. In terms of the 21-day notice period, we built some additional days within that timeline, just in case that we needed to. So I think day 1 actually commences a week on Tuesday of the 21-day period, which will allow us then sufficient time to go through the submissions and then still get the submissions back to be included in the final annual budget report that comes to Council in July. So we do have time within the timeline.
All right, any further speakers? If not, I'll say a few things. I'll be speaking against the amendment. And look, I certainly understand and agree with a lot of the points raised around some of the future cost liabilities that we have. But, one of the things that was said right at the start by Councillor Ferguson was ambition. And the reason I want to raise that is I think we have been very ambitious as a local government. In the last 8 years, this Shire's budget has increased from $19.5 million to what we're considering this evening, which is $37 million. That's a 93% increase in our budget in 8 years. I think we've been very ambitious with the community's money, and it has been to deliver a lot of the things that the community has been wanting, but we'd have to look at it in terms of the reality of what we can actually deliver. And the concern I have with this amendment is we know what this budget can deliver with what we're considering at 3%. Adding another 2%, potentially another $360,000, is we actually have to do something with that money. And that might just be putting it into a reserve. But you actually have to go to the community and say, we're asking you for this money because we're doing this with it. Putting it into a reserve without a plan behind it to back it is not something I can support. Because what are we tying this to? Are we tying it to the Sports Spaces plan? Are we tying it to the future agribusiness precinct? Are we tying it to the DMCYC? What are we tying it to? That is the piece that we sell to the community when we say to them, hey, we're asking you for another 5% of your money this year. There certainly is a lot of things coming up, the char map as well. But as I said in some response to some questions this evening, we are working on those foreshore management plans. Until we've got those, we don't actually know what we are asking the community for in terms of budget. I went along to those meetings in Peppermint Grove Beach where there were members of the community there that absolutely grilled us with the suggestion that was in that char map around potentially charging some of the residents in that area an additional rate to cover the cost of that char map. We can't go out and say to them, this is what it is, if we don't actually know what it is we're actually charging them for. The char map is going to be extremely expensive to implement some of those strategies. We need to have the plans behind them, the framework behind them to actually justify that expenditure to the community. And it's a lot of things like that, and the integrated growth framework, which that'll cover a lot of these master planning issues that Councillor Ferguson also mentioned in Peppermint Grove Beach, but it'll also cover it across Dalryallup, across Boynup, across Capel, in terms of ensuring that future development in those town sites is what the community wants, it's consistent with the amenity they want, and it actually sets a future vision and ambition for those towns. And I think everyone was around the room reacted the same way when they saw the proposal for Boynup and Capel and what could actually happen in those spaces in terms of foreshore activation along the river and some changes around where the CBD might actually sit in some of these towns. So there's certainly ambition that sits behind those. There's other things been mentioned around EVs and those sorts of things, but we've also talked about what we can actually deliver. And there's things that, like the EVs are one of those things where we've had that discussion and those grants that came up for those charges. There was more to it than simply find 50% to cover the cost of the implementation of these ERVs. There was requirements for the local government to purchase an EV. That was something we weren't prepared for. We don't know what are the insurances involved with those EVs. What's the requirement for employees if that's their allocated car at night? Are we also then having to install a charging facility at their personal residence or provide it? And what's the assurance around that? I'm not saying these are just, these things are things that can be worked out. But at the time the grant was applied for and the grant was offered to us, the Shire was not aware of those additional costs. So that decision was made not to accept that funding. But it's why we need to be sure of what we're doing in terms of delivering to the community. And these program of works are a brilliant example of that, and that change that's been mentioned this evening around forward planning works and delivering in the following financial year, because there has been a number of things carried over from previous financial years, and it's part of the reason why the budget this evening has a few dollars still attached to it and why there is some movements in reserves that seem quite large. I mean, that money funding for the DMCYC, that was budgeted in this financial year. It's just being drawn down on the reserve in the coming financial year. It doesn't necessarily mean it's an actual proper drawdown on the reserve. It's just that's where the money's been sitting. What we are really missing in this key discussion, and something that myself and I know a few others have been banging on about, is our long-term financial plan. That is in critical need of updating so that we actually see all these long-term liabilities spelled out across the horizon. We do see it in the Treasury modelling, but to have that 15-year time frame, that horizon where we can see over the next 5, 10, 15 years what our rates, potential rate increases look like, what our potential expenses look like, and what our capital works looks like. And not just capital works in terms of, the stuff we need to look after every day around footpaths and roads and that, but things like the DMCYC, things like trails, those sorts of community assets that really start to make a community what it is. So I really do understand the intent of the amendment. In a lot of ways, I agree with it because there is some significant liabilities coming forward, as has been mentioned around this table this evening. Don't need to go over them again. But without solid financial planning behind it, and it is coming, but we don't have it as part of setting this budget. We can't just go out to the community and say, we want an extra 2% off you, because at some point in the future we might do this. We need to actually say we are going to do this. We are forward planning this. This is the money we need from you to do it. So that's the reason I can't support the amendment. I'll leave it there. All right, if there's no further speakers, does the mover wish to close?
Thank you, Mr. Shire President. Look, I'll try and be brief. I know that's a challenge for me, but we'll do my best. Look, I've really appreciated the respectful response from councillors to my amendment, both for and against, and they're very thoughtful, and all the arguments are not without some merit. But I would take issue with a number of them, if I may. Councillor Giano has observed that, in fact, the effective rate yield is closer to 5%, but he, as pointed out, I think, by Councillor Tarrant, I'm not sure who did that, Councillor Noonan, that in fact, that's due to the fact that we've actually have an increase in the number of rateable properties, more residents, more demand on services. They may not manifest themselves in the moment, but they will manifest themselves over time. And that natural accumulation or increase in rates should not be factored into the broad rate increase. So I don't think that's actually an argument that stands up when you analyse it rationally. The actual other
Point of order, please.
Certainly.
Point of order, Councillor Sciano.
Point of order, 10.4, personal explanation. I'd like the opportunity to make explanation given that the comment was directed at the comment that was made by myself.
Okay. Understanding order 10.42, you may make the personal explanation immediately.
Yeah, and the personal explanation is that statement is, to my understanding, incorrect. The yield is made up of both the increase to GRV in the various categories, the increase to UV in various categories, along with growth in actual rateable properties, and the increase in the minimum. And the calculations across those various things are actually quite different. And that's why I made the comment that the yield does not work in parallel. And that was the phrase I used, parallel. Yield is not parallel to the change in GRV. And council will be aware of that because a 5% and a 4% rate model were provided by staff to council during the workshop.
Councillor
Thank
Ferguson.
you for the opportunity to give that explanation.
Councillor Ferguson, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr. Shire President, and thank you for that comment. The other matter that came up was, and a number of councillors have mentioned it, is in respect to the CHAR map and the reaction in the community when that was originally presented. But the reaction was about a clause buried in the fine print that was largely to do with the fact that those properties that receive beneficial effect from remediation, that is, raising the levies on the Capel River or something similar, would be directly liable for the costs. Whereas the argument that I put forward at the time and subsequently argued in council is that the community generally is responsible for that. The state government's generally responsible, the federal government's generally responsible. And indeed, it seems to me entirely predictable that we would need to start bulking up our reserves in that fund, in that capital reserve fund, to actually provision for that into the future. I don't think it needs to be an astonishing revelation on the way to the long-term financial plan or corporate business plan that we need to do that. I think it's bleedingly obvious that we need to do it. In respect to the issue regarding the, I need to put my glasses on, thank you. Councillor Dillon, in a very succinct and effective way, he said, this is not the moment. I would politely say that this is the moment. This is the moment when we are going to put the document out for public consultation. If the public doesn't like it, they'll tell us. And then we actually have to form a view about our strategic vision for the council when we come back to adopt the plan in July. But once you throw the pond into the water, it's very hard to get it back. If we throw out 3%, there's going to be no real prospect of us as a collective council arguing for an increase, even if we sincerely believe it's justified. On any rational basis alone, notwithstanding the fact that they may not be spelled out specifically in the long-term financial plan or in the corporate business plan, it's very obvious that we need to start provisioning for reserves. I've mentioned the Charmat Reserve, or to use the correct expression, Climate Change Adaptation and Sustainability Reserve. Now, the fact that we've got some 80-odd thousand in there, and the only increase in the future year is the interest earned on it. Well, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. It's also not good enough to say the Contaminated Sites Reserve, which we all acknowledge around this table, is going to require substantial contribution from council into the future. There may well be access to grants. I'm not certain of the mechanism that would apply to that. But we've got former tip sites, we've got council work sites that are going to require remediation. The reserve shows a diminution from 412 to 322,000. I'm not entirely sure why, but 100,000 must have been allocated along the way out of that reserve. But we should at the very least be replenishing that. At the very least be replenishing that. And then the Waste Management Reserve, which is still remains an utter mystery to me, and I look forward to having a conversation with staff about that at a briefing. That's fine, but nonetheless, there's a Waste Infrastructure Reserve, which confusingly says it was 758,000, transfers in 758,000, closing balance 1.534. I'm not sure how that works. Where did the 700 odd extra thousand come from? But nonetheless, we should be ensuring what's going to happen as a consequence of probably of us not being able to deal with green waste, FOGO waste, other than for landfill. That will lead to an acceleration of landfill depletion. The state government doesn't seem to be minded to support the South West councils, and indeed the South West Council doesn't appear to have someone sitting on the minister's doorstep asking and begging for this to be dealt with. So we're going to actually, aside from the fact it might cost us less in the short term, we're actually going to be stuck with the long-term prospect of having to look for, collaboratively or singularly, for additional waste sites. And I don't think we should be depleting that reserve by way of operational costs in terms of the Waste Management Reserve, or we should be deleting it, or other than bulking it up in the actual Waste Management Infrastructure Reserve, because quite clearly, in some form or another, we're going to need it. We can't say, because we didn't put the rates up by a bit here and there along the way, and we get to 3 or 5 years down the track, we're going to need 10, 15 and 20% rate increases to deal with these long-term issues. We need to recognise them and start making contributions and building up to them now, and I urge council to support the amended motion. Thank you.
All right, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? Confirming, Councillor Sciano, your vote is against.
Against.
Leads to a split vote of 4-4, which means I have to make the casting vote in accordance with the practice that I've always done. And my casting vote is cast in accordance with the position that maintains the status quo, meaning that the casting vote is also cast in the negative. The amendment is lost. Which means we return to the original motion. It being 8 p.m. though, I will adjourn the meeting for 10 minutes to allow for a light refreshment. Just confirm you're back online there, Seb. Yeah. All right, it being 8:10 p.m, I'll call the meeting back to order. So we've returned to the original motion. The officer's recommendation. Are there any speakers for or against? Councillor Ferguson. You'd already had the call prior to the moving of your amendment. Did you still wish to speak?
I did, Mr. President.
Or I'll move that we suspend standing order 10 point.
Oh, no, I understand that, yeah. Well, I actually read that.
10.1. Is there a seconder to that? Councillor Noonan. All those in favour? And those against? And that's carried 7-1. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Shire President. Look, I'm just going to be very brief. I can't support the motion as it currently is printed, and I do refer, even though he's expressed his views contrary to mine, he has used that wonderful word or expression of seize the moment. And this is a moment, and the moment is for us not to adopt a minimalist budget, it's to adopt a budget that offers the opportunity for some capacity to bulk up our reserves and fund an ambitious program into the future. Thank you.
Excuse me. Are there any further speakers for or against? Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Yeah, I can see the logic in that. I'd like to maybe make the observation that people have mentioned that last year the impact of the 17% on average increase in rates. Well, I've got to point out that we were not responsible for that, for the bulk of that increase. The bulk of that increase came from Landgate, okay, from the reevaluation from Landgate. The rate increase that we actually proposed last year was in fact very modest in the scheme of things. And in addition to that, even with that on average 17% increase that we had last year, we were still and still remain and always have been for the, from a lifetime of memory, we have been, still are, the lowest rating shire in the region. Now, the problem that we've got is that it's fine being the poor cousin if everybody expects you to remain the poor cousin. But that's not where we are. That is no longer where we are. People, and it's not just in Dalyella, but people in all areas of the Shire are starting to, are making it very, very clear to us that they expect more. They expect more. They want facilities which are the equivalent of things that they see happening in neighbouring shires, in places as far-flung as Bruce Rock and Wongan Hills and so on and so forth. There are expectations that we have to start stepping up to meet. Now, I note that Bunbury last night passed a rating increase of 6.5%. Now, the impact of that is that Bunbury will have some of the funds that it needs to provide the services and facilities that their ratepayers expect. It's bizarre that a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom, asbestos-clad, homes, Housing Commission home from the 1950s in Bunbury is rated higher than a brand new 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom home in Dalyellop or anywhere else in the Shire. We have to step away, I think, from seeing the virtue in being the poor cousin, or being we can do it cheaper than anybody else, by simply not providing or not having the facilities, when the community expectation is that we do start providing those things. I know the President mentioned things like foreshore redevelopment and the riverside activation. Before we can, improving the trails opportunities for the Shire, before we can do any of those sorts of things, yes, we have to have the plans. Yes, we do have to deliver things, but we have to have not just money to provide consultants to do up master plans. We actually have to have, at some point, sufficient funds to actually do the work, to actually deliver the projects that people are expecting. And that's where I think people will ultimately have their say. Now, it's good that whatever we do tonight, whatever happens tonight, we're going out for community consultation in the next couple of weeks. People will have their say. And every single time we speak to ratepayers, sometimes they complain about rate rises. And when you point out, it's not all us, it's the re-evaluation of the GRV, it's Landgate, for the most part last year. In every single conversation, there's two sides of it. There's I don't like the rate rise, but I want an extra, this or that, or I'm expecting better sporting facilities. I'm expecting you to do something about the beach facilities. I'm expecting a better path down at, from the surf club down to the beach. I'm expecting improvements in the path networks. We can't put our hand on our hearts and say that we are being good, responsible stewards if we are not providing or not making provision for money to go into reserves, to build up the reserves, so that there is actually money there to not just deliver a nice plan, a nice glossy brochure, but to actually deliver the projects that people are expecting to see. So people will have their say.
Councillor Noonan, I'll just give you a one minute warning.
30 seconds, all I need. We will have, whatever we do tonight, people will have their say, and I'd encourage all councillors to, I know you will, I have absolute confidence in that you will listen to what the community expects us to do. Thank you.
Are there any further speakers to the item? No, or I'll just say a few things, and I don't want to go over the debate we've really had again, but the only thing I would highlight, and I suppose it comes down to our own perceptions of the community perception survey, is in there there was proper recognition there around some of the improvements, the services the council delivers. I mean, one of the biggest increases we saw were in our library services, but also in our parks and gardens. And that's come down to the investment that council's made in its workforce, having more general hands in parks and our works team to actually properly service those assets. But another part of the feedback that the community did give us, though, was wanting to see that better value for money from their rates. that's why I think the budget that's before us that involves a 3% increase and a 5.5% increase in total yield is the correct path this year. As I said, there's some things I do want to see come forward for council to consider as part of its going forward in the future, mainly the long-term financial plan, which has those figures, that long-term trend and the story to sell to the community. And that's where we'll start to see them go, okay, now I can see the value for money in my rates. And that's why in briefings you've all heard me say it around, we need the static, the legislative, the data in that long-term financial plan, but we also need the part at the front of the document, which I won't use the exact words I used, but it is the good, the story to sell. Why you love Capel, why you love living in the Shire of Capel, why we are the lifestyle of choice. That's the long-term financial plan we need to sell that value for money. And until we've got that, I think this is the right way to start. But anyway, getting back to the actual, the actual budget and what we've got here. Quite a few program of works that are also considered, that have already been considered by council, mostly in May, but in previous meetings as well. And it is good to see that better planning for our future programs between having having the design and permissions and approvals in one financial year with the delivery followed. That should hopefully lead to less carryover projects, which we have unfortunately been seeing over the last few years for various reasons. But I suppose what I did want to do is to completely put the administration and staff on notice that delivery of those program of works this financial year is paramount for me. And I'm sure there are a few others around this table who would agree. So, they have been scaled back. We have discussed about ability for the organisation to deliver them. It was even a comment mentioned by the Deputy President around the ability of the organisation to deliver. I believe we're very confident of that. So I have my trust in the organisation that they will deliver what we are endorsing, what we have endorsed, and what we will formally and finally endorse in July. So, excuse me. With that, I'll ask if there's any further speakers to the item. Councillor Terentry.
My concern now is that we actually do propose a draft annual budget tonight and not go, that's my main concern right now, that we need to do that tonight. Thank you.
Are there any further speakers to the item? Councillor McCleary, do you wish to close? Oh, yes, sorry, I forgot we were out of that. Sorry, that's my fault. I will move that we resume full standing orders. Thank you for that pick-up. Councillor, is there a seconder? Councillor Dillon. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Councillor Scianna, can you just confirm your vote was affirmative?
Yes.
All right, we are back in full standing orders. Councillor McCleary, do you wish to close?
Thank you, Mr. President. I tell you, I've heard all the arguments in the process, and it's good debate that we've had tonight. I do have concerns when we make comments. No, I won't say that. Our decisions on rates are ours. We do it through a very long task. The staff provide us with sufficient information to come up with those ideas. GRV, yes, it's set by the state, but it's our decision how we rate that, and that's how it comes out through the modelling. It's not, we can't blame GRV for increasing rates, only how it spreads the rates. It's a formula to spread to each individual property. We talked about fiscal responsibility. This is fiscal responsibility. We're living within our means. We're going to deliver a budget. We're spoken about capability to do things, and we've got a lot of concentration from the staff here to focus on that. So at the end of this coming financial year, I hope to see not too many carryovers unless there's some disaster that causes that. I also note there's some growth areas in there. We've got a couple of commercial properties coming on in Dowyella. That's Coles will be built during the financial years. Audi are optimistic and they might be built in those years. They are big ticket items that give us a big revenue stream. They're in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands that we get through that process. There's also the developer contribution. Each time we get a new property, I think we're up to $2,500 a property now for developer contributions to community facilities in Dalyalup. It's one of the few things that we get. So that increases that reserve, which is assigned to a formula to spend within that community. We had a couple of attachments. We go through all those. I do note that within the attachments, there's definitely works at the toilets and stuff at Peppy Grove and the Wave Walk, so there's facilities included in there. As far as Ironstone Gully, I noticed there was 20 grand allocated to doing some things in capital works at Ironstone Gully. All those things have been put into the budget. I commend people, or I encourage people to read through the attachments to see what's intended to be spent around the community. With that said, I'd like to put the motion.
All right, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And those against? And that's carried 5-3. Councillor Sciano, just confirming your vote was affirmative.
Yes.
All right. We now move to public question time. Is there any questions? Nope. There are no items for consideration behind closed doors, and there being no further business on the agenda this evening, I will close the meeting at 8:27 p.m. Thank you very much, councillors, for your time and deliberations. Thank you to all the committee members who participated this evening, and thank you to anyone who may be watching online. Good evening.